Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the webinar to launch the evaluation of the Veterans Advocacy People. My name is Ray Locke. I'm delighted to welcome you here today. We've got about 60 odd people already come into the webinar, so I'm just going to use the first couple of minutes to put some housekeeping points across. But before I do that, most importantly, I want to introduce our British Sign Language interpreters, who are Russell and Taz. They're going to be alternating throughout this morning. If you need to view them, then if you just go to side-by-side gallery view in the top right-hand corner of Zoom, then one or other of them will be visible throughout the session. We have an hour for the webinar this morning. We're going to finish off with a panel discussion. If you have any questions you'd like to submit to the panel, then please use the Zoom Q&A function. Don't wait until the panel because we need to bring them to me so I can pose them to the panelists. So anything that crops up as we go through the session, please do enter them into that Q&A function. If you want to use the chat function to say, good morning, it's lovely and sunny in Cheltenham, by the way, it is lovely and sunny in Cheltenham, then feel free to do so. This is going to be recorded. If you want to pick up after what went on, then it will be posted on the Veterans Advocacy People website, which is theadvocacypeople.org.uk. If you can tweet with us, that'd be great. #advocacy. And any of the questions which aren't answered, again, we will make sure we get those back on a blog to you. So I think most important then, we're absolutely delighted that we're joined this morning by the Minister for Defence, People and Veterans, Johnny Mercer. Johnny is the MP for Plymouth Moorview, but he's here in his ministerial position, where he's been for about 18 months now. He was responsible and now oversees the Office for Veterans Affairs. Johnny enjoyed a 10-year military career in the Royal Artillery, during which he saw 3 operational tours in Afghanistan. So I generally can't think of anyone better to open our webinar this morning than the Minister for Defence, People and Veterans, Johnny Mercer.
Thank you very much, Ray, and thank you for that very kind introduction. Can you hear me okay? You can, wonderful, excellent. So thank you so much for inviting me here today. And I want to welcome you all to the virtual launch of this paper. I would like to say thank you, obviously, to Ray again and the rest of the Forces in Mind team for providing the funding that has supported this project and enabled this event to take place, which is one of a number of projects that Ray and his team support. And I'm very clear that what we try and do in the Office for Veterans Affairs is get led by evidence-based policy. And I'm extremely grateful for all the work that Ray does in that area. As some of you may know, I had the opportunity to visit the Plymouth branch of the Veterans Advocacy People Service back in 2019. One of the many perks of my role is the opportunity to go out and meet like-minded people, people really striving to make a difference to a community that I care deeply about. I think it is important to highlight with advocacy work, and it's something that Thomas picked up in his foreword, is that it is there to support everyone, regardless of the nature of it. Life in an increasingly complex modern world isn't always easy, and life after service can present added pressures that aren't always immediately clear to everyone. Sometimes it can be overwhelming, and as highlighted in the report, can result in derailment. That to me is what advocacy is there for, to provide assurance and guidance to people who at that moment cannot face or cannot navigate the services and the support that's available. For the services you provide, I must pay tribute to the Veterans Advocacy People. It is your example, with the countless other charities and organisations across the nation, that helps promote the purpose and meaning of the Office for Veterans Affairs. And in return, it is the role of the Office for Veterans Affairs to make your job easier. This government is committed to make this the best country in the world to be a veteran. Veterans need to be at the heart of policy, and that is why I pitch for the office to be situated at the heart of government in the Cabinet Office. The OVA has existed for just over a year, and whilst this may be a new endeavour, we have persisted over the course of an exceptionally challenging year to make progress towards that shared goal. In that time, we've delivered a new employment scheme which makes it easier for veterans to join the civil service, a new rail card for discounted travellers for veterans and their families. We commissioned the King's Centre for Military Health Research to conduct a study tracking how this pandemic has really affected the veterans community. We've delivered a £6 million support package for over 100 service charities. The Veterans Advocacy People were a recipient, and I'm pleased this money has contributed to such an important service. We have new key priorities in the year ahead, particularly around data and getting a data strategy to improve our evidence base and understanding of veterans' experiences. We continue to champion the use of digital technology to improve access to support for veterans. We're embarking on a program of work to understand the service experience of members of the LGBTQ+ community. Just like this paper does, we will evaluate our progress. Some of that work is well underway through our Veterans Advisory Board, which had its first meeting at the end of 2020. We will also continuously measure our progress against the objectives we set out in the strategy for our veterans. By evaluating and measuring, not just our successes, but our failures as well, we can truly understand what works and then shape these crucial services accordingly. For everyone who played a part in carrying out this evaluation, Ray and the rest of the Forces in Mind Trust team, to the Veterans Advocacy People team, and to the Plymouth University team, thank you very much. Back over to you, Ray.
Thanks, Minister. Minister, are you able to just take a single question from me?
I'm more than happy to take questions.
Great, because we've just had one come in, and you probably aren't aware, but the public funding of the Veterans Advocacy Service sadly has finished. I just wonder, given this evaluation shows how valuable it is, whether there's anything government can do to secure funding for the service going forward.
Let me go away and have a look at that, Ray. I'm very clear in my mind the work of what the advocacy service does, and it critically intervenes at that point that I'm trying to get to all the time, where an individual literally has no idea where to turn or how to access the services. There's a lot of talk in this country about veteran services not being available, and in my experience and a lot of people's experience, that is not the case. It's a question of accessing them, understanding the pathways, and making sure when people do access them, they are taken through a care pathway where they're looked after. And the advocacy service is a real significant player in that field. So let me take it away, and I will come back to you.
That's kind of you, Minister. Thank you. And then perhaps just a quick follow up. Then you've been very active in Parliament in regard to the covenant and legislation. Is there some link between what you're trying to achieve with that and the whole concept of advocacy, and in this case, veterans advocacy?
There is, yes, because essentially what I'm trying to do is level up the playing field so that the armed forces kind of really means something to the people who are trying to use it. So, the advocacy service very much deals with the same group of people, and the intention is to make it unlawful for discrimination to occur against our armed forces personnel, veterans or their families. And as I think local authorities, we will be issuing statutory guidance to them on how to achieve that. Advocacy services have a really important role to play. So I think going forward, if we continue to work together, we can come up with a solution that really helps the community that we're both trying to serve.
Minister, thank you very much. So thanks for your time, and also thanks for taking those ad hoc questions. Really appreciate it. And that's shown up on our screens here. Minister, if I could invite you to turn your camera off so you can relax a little bit. No doubt a busy day ahead. I'd like to introduce the Chief Executive of the Advocacy People, Matthew Hilton. Matthew and I are just going to set the scene. And what I just want to say very briefly about Forces in Mind Trust, as the Minister has said, we basically fund people to go out and find better ways of supporting supporting the armed forces community. In this case, we felt that if we fund an evaluation of this service, it could end up in a long-term, better way of supporting those members, those relatively few members of the armed forces community who, when they transition from military to civilian life, do need the assistance of the public sector, and in particular needs the assistance of advocacy in order to navigate their way and to get the support that they are entitled to. So Matthew, let me hand over to you to provide your perspective.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you, Ray. Good morning to everyone. And thanks as well to the Minister for joining us this morning and those positive messages he just gave. I'm sure we're going to pick up as we go through this event on this issue of the difficulty in a sustainable future for a service like this. But look, we all know that these are not easy issues. Yeah, you know, there are hard choices to be made, and Johnny and his colleagues have got to deal with some pretty complex issues. So let's say up front that this is not an easy thing to handle. And I think what we're doing today is trying to contribute to an understanding of something that is really complicated. So it's good to hear that people feel positive about it, but let's say straight up front, this is not a simple thing to do. Anyway, good morning again to all of you. I'm Matthew Hilton. I'm the Chief Executive of the Advocacy People. We were previously called SEAP. We're an independent charity. We work across the south of England. We provide independent advocacy and advocacy related services. I suppose to set the scene a bit, we all know how hard it can be when we don't feel listened to, when what's important to us isn't taken seriously by others, or when we don't have the words to say what we really feel or want. That can be even more difficult when decisions are being made about our health and our social welfare. These sorts of systems can be very hard to navigate for all of us, and certainly including for military veterans who maybe just aren't used to operating within them. What sets us, the advocacy people, apart from some of the others involved in health and social care, is our independence, I would say. We don't make decisions, we aren't emotionally involved, we don't deliver care or award financial support. But what my colleagues, advocates who are themselves veterans or family members of veterans, do have is an insight, an understanding about military life and the challenges that people can face post-service. So we can take time to understand the person's needs, wishes, views, explore the options and potential outcomes. We can facilitate decision-making without making decisions or offering our opinions. And I think very much in line with the way that the Minister was presenting it in his remarks as well. So once the person or the client has reached a decision, we can then support them to take action. And that might be helping write a letter, making a phone call, attending a meeting. By tailoring the support to what our client needs, we can make sure that we don't do things for them that they can do for themselves. So all this means that we can remain objective, person-centered. We've got no vested interest other than to ensure that the person's voice is heard, their rights are upheld, and that they receive the care and support to which they're entitled. And that's the essence of our advocacy. Ultimately, the next time that person runs into difficulties, we'd like them to feel more confident to speak up for themselves. So that said, by way of introduction, what we're going to do now is listen to two of our advocates directly, both military veterans, talking about the impact of the Veterans Advocacy People on the people that they work with. So we're now going to run a short presentation.
An individual's life in the service can be regimented. You know what to wear, you know where to be, you know what time, and there are clear lines of, if I have a problem, I'll go and see my regimental officer, my division officer, my company sergeant major. Those avenues, when an individual leaves, are not necessarily there. So they have to be much more self-reliant. And what we found is that the issues that people had or came into contact with, trying to get an answer was almost Byzantine. I'm being told by the DWP I should go to the council, for example, but the council is saying it's not to do with me, it's to do with the DWP. To untie that Gordian knot, as it were, I didn't do it, but I sat alongside a client who was able then to unpick and go, actually, it's becoming a little bit clearer now. We also found that there was an education slant to this as well. For those organisations that came into contact with veterans, we produced a veterans awareness training, and we delivered that to non-military charities, to statutory services such as the Benefits Agency, the housing councils, social workers, NHS staff, to contextualise why they struggled outside of that. You will be at A at this time wearing this rig, to, right, actually you've got to make that decision yourself now, shipmate.
I think we've always stressed very clearly, we're not a PTSD charity. We don't deal just with people who have PTSD, but PTSD does affect a lot of people who we came across. And that had lots of different implications in how they dealt with a particular issue they were facing. One ex-soldier who'd served as a police officer for many years after his service, he had a trigger during his police service that brought his PTSD to the fore. And eventually he was facing a complicated discharge procedure. But with our help, he was able to gather the strength, and it really did mean gathering the strength to fight a decision that had been made, and it protected his pension rights for the future. And that was extraordinarily important. And I can say hand on heart, without the advocacy people being involved, he would not have got to that result, because he would have just not known how to get his voice heard in the way that it was. Because of COVID, we were having to help people through processes that were very much delayed. And that was causing a lot of hardship. And sometimes it was signposting them to other services where they could get help in the meantime. And quite a lot of times, without our support in the background, they would have had nobody, because a lot of the other support services during COVID fell away. Over history, rights of people have been built up and enshrined in law, and it's been recognised by governments and legislators that it's necessary for the vulnerable people in society and the not so vulnerable to have support when they're coming up against large state bodies. If you want to make a complaint against an NHS body, you're entitled to have the help of an advocate. And that's what we call a statutory service. So with veterans advocacy, it's very much more what we look upon as community advocacy. And we call it non-statutory advocacy because there is no law that says a veteran is entitled to have that kind of advocacy support. And so the advocacy people decided that they would add it on to their service as a separately funded service, where the only criteria to ask for help was that you were a veteran or a family member of a veteran, and you could come to us with any type of problem and we would see what kind of service we could provide for you. I have had that as feedback on a client survey form. I felt human again. I felt like I was treated as a human being.
One of the comments I received was, although I didn't get the outcome I wanted, I now feel able to move on because I've been heard.
We don't have grants to give them to be able to buy a new microwave. We don't have that kind of service. What we do have is the ability for them to find their way through the mire of administration that is so daunting to people, give the right information to them and allow them to find a way to get what they need.
Right, there we are. So thanks to the guys for that presentation. I hope that that gave a bit more detail about the kind of work that we do. Just before we move on, just to say, I know that some people are posting some questions. Can I just remind you, even if we don't pick them up today, we're going to try and pick them afterwards, but do please, if you've got questions, can you make sure you post them in the Q&A rather than the chat? We're all getting more and more used to these tools every time we use them, aren't we? But that's one thing. If you could just remember, there are two ways of contributing. So questions into Q&A, please, if you can do it that way. So what you've heard now, I suppose, through that video is kind of how we see it from a delivery perspective. But what we can do now, and the focus of today perhaps, is to try and look at this objectively. And so what we're going to do is hear about this evaluation work that's already been mentioned, work done by Pamela, Varley and her colleagues in the SERIO team down at Plymouth University. So I'm now going to hand over to you, Pam, to make your presentation.
Thank you, Matthew, and good morning all. My name is Dr. Pamela Varley, and I'm going to present to you today some highlights and key findings from an evaluation and social return on investment analysis of the Veterans Advocacy People service. Just to give you a little bit of background, I'm based at SERIO. We're an applied social research unit at the University of Plymouth. We do work on a wide range of diverse research and evaluation projects for public, private and third sector clients, many of whom seek to engage and affect change for society's most vulnerable groups. We're a small, cohesive team. Many of us have gotten involved in this research that I'm presenting here today, and I'll just give brief mention to my colleagues that have done so: Donna, Helen, Amy, Claudia and Adam, all of whom have played a really key role in the production of this research that you're going to hear about today. Back in 2018, just to give you a little bit of background for the evaluation, the Advocacy People set out with a really key objective, and that objective was to gather a credible evidence base in order to better understand the value and impact of advocacy for military veterans and their families, and also to share that knowledge more widely as well. They really wished to broaden the understanding of advocacy and the understanding of its potential social and financial benefits, and to broaden that understanding held by government, national organisations and a wider audience as well. So to that end, SERIO was commissioned by the Advocacy People to carry out a rigorous, independently verified evaluation of the Veterans Advocacy People, to really explore the service's impact and to collate that credible evidence base that they were seeking. The evaluation itself spanned 3 years, included a mix of methods. So we've had advocates, clients of the service, delivery team members, external stakeholders, all taking part in in-depth, semi-structured, qualitative telephone interviews over the course of the evaluation. We also carried out a focus group and some advocate on the job shadowing over the course of the evaluation, and all supplemented as well with a rigorous analysis of service monitoring data and client feedback, and development of case studies as well, which narrate the Veterans Advocacy People experience from a client perspective. More recently then as well, alongside that other work, we've conducted a social return and investment analysis, and we're going to focus on results of that analysis later in the presentation today as well. So really a far-reaching evaluation. We covered a lot of ground, we spoke to a lot of people, engaged obviously in partnership meetings as well throughout the course of the evaluation to track progress and see the effect that the service was having on people. And the end result of all of that evaluative work then, of course, was the early findings report in 2018, followed then by an interim report in 2019, and more recently the final report and social return investment analysis, which we have sewn up in 2021. All of which was accompanied again by a suite of 3 case studies appended to the report. You'll see in depth in the report itself a review of the literature. I'm just going to quickly recap here on some of the kind of key findings that emerged from that piece of work, just to give you an overview. We found that veterans often lack knowledge of what is actually available to them, as some have alluded to this morning in the introductory speeches. Some struggle to access appropriate accommodation. Veterans are at higher risk of homelessness as well, often with inadequate pre-crisis support available to them. A significant minority are facing real financial difficulties, and there is a high level of reliance on means-tested benefits as well, and also a greater likelihood of being in receipt of disability benefits alongside that as well. The picture on unemployment and levels of mental health problems are less clear than those aforementioned. There is, though, general agreement on the challenges faced by veterans in navigating those unfamiliar recruitment systems, ensuring their skills are transferable and understood by employers, and also widespread recognition as well that stigma and a lack of recognition of need by veterans themselves are major barriers to accessing mental health services. In fact, veterans themselves do not sometimes access support for quite a long time after problems have first manifested themselves. Certain subgroups will face particular challenges, of course, and overall social support is really key to dealing with the practical, emotional and mental health challenges of transitioning to civilian life. In terms of the policy side of things, the Armed Forces Covenant sets out the UK government's commitments to ensuring that veterans do not face disadvantage in accessing public or commercial services. And there has been a lot of attention paid in recent years to the needs of veterans. So the last 5 years, we've seen the creation of the Veterans Board, creation of the Veterans Gateway as well, the launch of a 10-year veteran strategy, also the creation of the Office for Veterans Affairs, and more recently then the launch of the Defence Transition Service as well. There's been other further positive interventions that we've seen in respect of housing, employment, the development of veteran-specific health services. But there do remain some key issues around the complexity of the service landscape, the perception of a postcode lottery and accessing those services from time to time, and also the need for more joined-up veteran services we hear called for as well. Advocacy is seen as potentially contributing to some of these issues through promoting client empowerment, tackling these issues by helping people build relationships, engage with social networks, and also providing more practical support alongside that. The literature does suggest that the importance of cultural sensitivity in the delivery of such support is really, really key. And I think, as others have mentioned, that's something that's, we see reflected in the Veterans Advocacy People service as well, in their use of veterans in the role of advocates, a unique selling point of the service. So just to conclude the segment then, there is a lack of literature really which robustly assesses the impact of advocacy, and critically as well for us, a lack of literature that assesses the system and financial impacts. And that is something that this research that we're presenting here today, sets out to fill that gap. In order to examine the service impact on clients, this evaluation that we're talking about here today utilised a validated tool called the Short Work Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale. Some of you will be familiar with this measure. It asks participants of the Veterans Advocacy People service to consider 7 positively worded statements. You can see them along the y-axis of this graph that I've just presented, and to provide a score for each of those which reflects their current state of thinking, their current state of well-being. And results for these were collated before and after interaction with these Veterans Advocacy People service, and used to monitor shifts in mental well-being and measure the effect that this service was having on participants' well-being. And you can see from the graph that we recorded a positive uplift on all 7 measures from this particular scale. So clients of Veterans Advocacy People were recording a positive uplift across all of those. The greatest of which was a 23% uplift, in fact, in the mean score for I've been dealing with problems well. So, a really key area where the service is having an impact. It's helping veterans to deal with their problems and to deal with them well, and also boosting how optimistic they feel, how useful they feel, their relaxation levels, their clarity of thought, feeling close to other people, and that resilience and autonomy and ability to make up their own mind about things as well. So really, really positive results recorded on that measure throughout the evaluation every time we've looked at that. It has overall seen that the total mean score for those measures post-intervention and interaction with the service moved closer to the average score for the UK as well. So a key finding there that there's a clear positive direction of travel overall for service users. We also, over the course of evaluation, recorded a wealth of other positive outcomes as well. There's lots more besides the mental wellbeing uplift. There's been considerable financial gains recorded and reported through the services monitoring system as well, data which was shared with us to do an independent evaluation of. So we're seeing, approaching 4.5 million in financial benefits recorded over a 2-year period during a portion of the evaluation. Positive outcomes as well in relation to housing, accommodation being accessed, housing support put in place, eviction and tenancy loss avoided, aids and adaptations carried out, rent arrears cleared, financial support for new home setup being put in place as well. So lots of really positive housing outcomes recorded. Other positive changes and outcomes for clients included accessing new services, onward organisational engagement, so signposting and moving people on the right pathway for their care, improved health management, employment, training and education successes as well were also recorded as key outcome areas. But we also have social integration and relationship support as well as other kind of service issue outcomes for clients who engage with the service and seek that kind of support to improve their lives. Clients particularly as well highlighted the importance of having someone to speak on their behalf when they're having difficulties communicating, something that Johnny and Matthew have both alluded to as well. It's having that voice, finding your voice and having somebody there to work through the system with you and navigate it by your side. A key client outcome area as well related to how the Veterans Advocacy People enables health-seeking behaviour in clients. Something that we know is a problem is that motivation and will to go and seek out that help that will make positive change in your life, and people who have previously struggled to acknowledge problems and to seek out support, again, are having that help-seeking behaviour facilitated through engaging with the advocacy service. Evidence also showing as well that clients' confidence and resilience has been boosted. We've seen that through the wellbeing scale, that autonomy and ability to tackle problems yourself, but really confidence and resilience coming through the qualitative research and the evaluation as well, and being really boosted by engaging with the Veterans Advocacy People. So that concludes a quick kind of run through the literature and some of the kind of key findings and outcome areas that that we've encountered over the course of the evaluation. I'm going to move now from those overarching findings and the broader benefits and outcomes recorded to focus on what is our most recent part of the analysis for this evaluation, and that is the social return on investment analysis. Some of you may be familiar with this methodology, perhaps more so than others, but I will walk through it and just give you an overview. Of course, there's more detail in the full report should you wish to view it, but I'll take you on a whistle-stop tour through the social return investment and the results that we have found. So the return on investment analysis presented here has focused on the year of 2019. So we chose that calendar year to conduct the analysis. It examines the return on investment generated by one calendar year of the Veterans Advocacy People. It's an evaluative retrospective SROI analysis, so we're reflecting back on that year once that year has already happened. And it looks at the economic, social and environmental impact of the Veterans Advocacy People during one standard year of established operations. So we're not considering the startup and the setup of the service, we're looking at it up and running over the course of 2019. The analysis does follow best practice in social return investment analysis. We've used validated approaches and accepted well-tested measures throughout. And as I said, further information on all decisions taken methodologically, resources utilised, and any assumptions inherent in the analysis as well can be viewed in the detailed report that we have produced for Veterans Advocacy People. But broadly speaking, there are 6 key steps in a successful SROI analysis, and you will see this through the literature guiding on how to go about conducting analysis of this type. So you begin by establishing scope and identifying stakeholders, clearly mapping out service outcomes and what it is that the ambitions of the service are in achieving, evidencing outcomes and giving them a value, so attributing a financial value to a particular service outcome, establishing what the impact of the service has been in that calendar year that we're looking at, what has been achieved for clients, and then using those outcomes achieved and the values that we can attribute to those outcomes, we calculate the social return and investment value then. Step 6 then really all about what we're doing at this stage of the research is reporting on those values and using them to inform our thinking and to guide our future efforts, but also embedding that process of collecting this kind of data and having that credible evidence base and data-driven approach into the future service delivery as well within the sector. So following an extensive mapping of outcomes and decisions on what we could reliably include in the analysis for the social return on investment, we did select appropriate indicators for inclusion in our model of analysis. Just to give you an idea of what was included, and I won't go into too much detail on each of these because they are quite complex, but the short Warwick Edinburgh mental wellbeing scale, which we introduced earlier, was a key factor for inclusion. We used also a range of HACT social value bank indicators. Now, HACT is the Housing Association's charitable trust. They're a recognised authority on social value bank indicators, so they have a set of values which they have already attributed to client outcomes which we could use, and those cover housing, debt, employment, education, social contact, feeling more in control of life, all those kind of things. We also used an NHS annual per person spend proxy as well, and further indicators for mobility and autonomy, which we sourced through the Global Value Exchange as well. All of these are just standard accepted social return on investment resources that are available to people doing this kind of work to utilise. But using these indicators allowed us to attribute a financial value to client outcomes, so we could calculate the return on investment, so we could ascertain what the outcome was for clients through use of this service. We could decide what the value of that was and use accepted means of calculating what that value was, apply all of that into our model and come up with our values, which I'm going to present in a moment. I have included one example below just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, but again, full details will be in the report. You'll see in the example that I've chosen here, we've got aids and adaptations carried out. So this would be people who have particularly difficulties with their mobility in the home, and having aids and adaptations carried out in the house, grants them greater autonomy and prevents accidents and reduces time required in hospital, etc. Also the introduction of mobility vehicles as well. So that table that you're looking at there has those 2 key outcome areas for clients. We look at the number of clients, the proxy value then as well is included. That's the value that we're attributing to that. And those values have been sourced from the Global Value Exchange and relate to the associated benefits of these interventions, which are a reduction in social care needs, increased autonomy. Adjustments were made to these calculations as well in line with best practice, and you'll see 3 additional columns there: deadweight, displacement and attribution. The deadweight, just in a nutshell, really looks at how you take into account the social improvements that would have happened anyway, regardless of any service intervention by the Veterans Advocacy People. So had there not been any intervention on behalf of the client by the advocate, what would have happened in that event? Displacement then considers the degree to which outcomes achieved have displaced other outcomes. So has the client receiving some kind of benefit resulted in somebody else elsewhere having a disbenefit? And the attribution then simply takes into account how much of the outcome we can really reliably and confidently attribute to the service interventions provided by the Veterans Advocacy People. So are there external factors at play that are bringing about these outcomes, or can we reliably say that the service has influenced them? So just to summarise then overall the approach again and recap, so we're all clear on how the analysis was carried out. The inputs, that's the cost of running the service for that calendar year, which we sourced through interaction with the team at Veterans Advocacy People and their accounting systems. The outputs, that's the client throughput, so how many clients have they dealt with over the course of the calendar year, how many people have moved through the service and benefited. The outcomes, what did they achieve through doing so, so what benefits were achieved for clients engaging with the service. And for that calendar year of 2019, using those values, we populated the tool that we use to conduct this analysis, which is Social Values UK Value Map, which some of you may be aware of. It's essentially an analysis tool for this kind of work, which allows you to input all of this data and rich information that you require over the course of the evaluation, and to process it and calculate it and come up with the appropriate values. As I mentioned earlier, we applied the appropriate settings. We did the best practice adjustments to the data and factored in everything we could in line with best practice. Based on all of that analysis, using all of the tools and the metrics that we've identified, a social return value, and by that I mean the value per amount invested in the service, £4.74 was calculated. So that was the figure that we arrived at, and that figure of 474 indicates that for every £1 spent on delivering the Veterans Advocacy People service, £4.74 in social value is created. So that was our conservative approach to measuring that. We using convention and best practice arrived at that value. You could also consider in this analysis as well that if we set aside the startup costs for rollout for their field and service expansion, that this model that we used and the metrics that we included using that value of 474 tells us that we could actually stretch the input costs for the service, and that's the cost that we identify for running the service, but we could stretch that figure to 860,000 in input costs before hitting a point of breaking even based on that return value. And bear in mind that the actual input costs for the year 2019 were just 181,000. So quite a lot of scope there to develop and invest in something like this without getting to a point of diminishing returns. To further explore that analysis, as is standard practice with social return investment analysis, we do what we call a sensitivity analysis. And a couple of these were carried out. I've included two here that are in the report just to talk you through it. Sensitivity analyses basically involve making adjustments to the model selected, and that's in order to explore the extent to which results would shift if assumptions were adjusted. So essentially, you're thinking about how a different set of assumptions, different to the ones you have made and committed to in line with best practice, how would changing those impact the resultant social return value? So the first analysis there on the presentation, sensitivity analysis A, involves reducing attribution. And we mentioned earlier, attribution relates to what would happen if we assumed that the service was in fact less responsible for outcomes and that other external factors were in fact contributing more to outcomes. So have we set our attribution levels at a fair level? Are we happy that the service is responsible for these outcomes? But even reducing that attribution by a considerable 30%, and we've done it in 3 steps there, step A, B, C, 10%, 20% less, 30% is the final one. You'll see the gradual reduction in social return value, but with that 30% reduction, we're still yielding a return of £3.10 in social value, which is still a considerable sum. The second sensitivity analysis then, B, involves extending the duration of outcomes. So the analysis that I've run through that allowed us to arrive at that value of 474 conservatively assumes that outcomes achieved and impact realised for clients who engage with the service will last just a single year. But if we reasonably increase that to 2 years and assume that somebody moving through the service who experiences that benefit will last for 2 years for that individual, without reducing the rate at which the outcomes are enjoyed over the course of the 2 years, that social return value will increase dramatically to £9.32. And in making that adjustment and taking a less conservative approach, which we do feel would be reasonable and a robust step to take, given the evidence that we've seen through the evaluation. It could see that return value rise considerably as well. So that concludes the run through of the key findings and the highlights from the social return investment. And I'm just going to finish briefly with some closing thoughts. The research has provided clear evidence over the course of the 3 years that it is possible to demonstrate the broader social and economic value of effective advocacy services, and the social return investment has allowed us to do that. And it's an approach we've used that could be replicated elsewhere and enhanced, that could be taken forward by providers in the sector and commissioners as well. There is also most certainly scope for further exploration of the outcomes of this service as well. We include what we can in the return on investment analysis, but that's not necessarily exhaustive, because not everything can be so clearly evidenced, and it's not so easy to attribute value to certain elements. There are knock-on effects for family members of those who benefit from engaging with the Veterans Advocacy People service that are not included in this model, and we know anecdotally and through research and engaging with veterans that those are considerable. Similarly, outcomes have been revealed through the evaluation's qualitative inquiry, to which a financial proxy cannot so easily be attributed, so we can't necessarily easily put value on certain things. And an example of that would be through interviews and case studies. We have seen, repeatedly, significant reductions in anxiety and suicidal ideation reported by clients. There's been avoidance of mental health escalation articulated by clients as well through our case study development and qualitative interviewing, and health improvements which would significantly further enhance resulting social values in analysis of this type. So were we able to, to collate that en masse across the whole service, engaging with all clients and putting values on all of those benefits that they've experienced, we would likely see that social return value of 474 or 932, depending on which model you adopt, rising considerably again. Those benefits are considerable, we know that. So I'll just finish by reiterating really that even with this conservative, strictly focused approach that we have adopted for this analysis, it's very clear from the results that the Veterans Advocacy People service really is delivering considerable outcomes for clients, really meaningful, positive outcomes that were really plentiful throughout this analysis. And the community it serves is having needs met with that, and the Veterans Advocacy People as well has been shown through this analysis to be doing that in a cost-effective manner as well. So thank you all very much for listening, and I'm going to hand you back now to Ray.
That's fabulous. Thanks very much, Pam. And a reminder to everybody that the report is available on the website of the advocacypeople.org.uk, and also on Forces in Mind Trust's website, and also our research. So a quick Google will see you there. What I'd like to do now is to move on to our panel discussion. We've got about 15 minutes left to do that. So those of you who join us on the panel, if I could ask you to turn your cameras back on, please. Many of these will be familiar. We've already heard from Matthew and Pam. I'd like to introduce Allie Bennington. Allie is at Help for Heroes, where she's been since 2012, when she's head of evaluation and assurance. She's certainly been a great friend to Forces in Mind Trust, and Allie spent quite a few years in the Army, both as a regular and a reserve force. And we're also joined, and I'm delighted as well, by James Sunderland MP, who is the MP for Bracknell, where he was elected in 2019. James spent 26 years in the Royal Logistics Corps, which is surely worthy of a medal in itself. And most importantly, though, James is the chair of the all-party parliamentary groups for veterans and for the Armed Forces Covenant. So we'll be coming to James in a second to hear his take on it. But Ali, let me ask you first of all, because of course Help for Heroes very much frontline service delivery. What is your experience of advocacy and how it adds perhaps to the more traditional welfare services?
Thank you, Ray, for your introduction, and great question. For a lot of veterans, they can access services themselves through the Veterans Gateway or going directly to military charities. However, in our experience, particularly those that are most vulnerable or are wounded, injured and sick, navigating the plethora of military service charity provision is particularly difficult. And certainly for our current and future beneficiaries, particularly those with long-term enduring health needs, this is a particular challenge. For us, therefore, we use advocacy services. This is helping them to navigate through this immense world of service provision. It's giving them a voice, it's promoting their voice and allows them to access and understand the information that's available to them and obtain those services. So broadly speaking, for the broader veteran community, the service provision is easily accessible. But for those with particular enduring issues, such as mental health issues, cognitive decline, and vulnerability, advocacy absolutely complements the existing provision.
Thanks, Allie. And perhaps you just educate me. Does Help for Heroes itself, do you operate an advocacy service, or do you depend on others?
We have a small clinical service that operates in the clinical sphere only. So that's for our very seriously injured veterans that have been injured on operational tours. We do provide that internal advocacy service with our own clinical nurses. But yes, we have absolutely made use of other advocacy services because there is a big need for that, for those individuals that need that face-to-face, one-to-one support.
Okay, I mean, there have been sort of 2 or 3 themes emerging from the questions that the webinar participants have put through. One is around funding, and perhaps we'll come back to that. And the other is about how available is advocacy as a service across the UK. And it's interesting what you've said there, Allie, about Help the Heroes. So, Matthew, I wonder if I could turn to you. I mean, I do recall visiting Hastings, one of my great days out at the right at the beginning of the project. And I wonder if you could just explain where your current service, or while it was being funded, actually operated, and then perhaps whether you have a view as to how we could expand it so it's available to all veterans across the United Kingdom.
Yeah. Thanks, Ray. And I mean, you really are touching on the nub of where we're at now, where we go next, what we've heard today. I'm sure this is a recurring theme in what everyone's thinking. We've heard today from Pam and from other people talking about their experience that there's something of value here. But as I said at the beginning, this is a complex world in which to run things, and money is tight. And that's really no different for us. If I sort of answer your question by, let me ask let me do the positive bit first. So what would I like to see in terms of how we could grow this, and what's a way in which we could build on where we are now? My kind of, option A would be to say that I'd like to see statutory coverage for advocacy extended to cover groups like veterans. And that's been our position all along. And I think a lot of people in principle sort of support that. What we've got in the world of advocacy more generally that we live in is 3 or 4 particular statutes that place a requirement on local authorities in particular to provide advocacy in certain circumstances to do with mental health and mental capacity. Won't go into that now, but there's a requirement placed on local authorities to provide advocacy, and we operate in that space. If we could find some way of replicating that so that there was a requirement to do something like this for veterans, then that would obviously be plan A. Now that's difficult. And, we heard at the beginning from the minister, I'm sure James would say as well, that's easier said than done, but that remains, if you like, our sort of plan A. Absent that, what I really hope is that the findings from the evaluation that Pam talked about earlier, and the experience that a lot of people are tapping into around this conversation, I hope that's going to sort of inspire potential commissioners really in different areas to commissioners and funders, and that someone soon will be able to commission in some way some more of this sort of work. Yeah, we certainly would. We'd like to hear from anyone interested in supporting us to take this forward. But at the same time, what I'll say openly, and I've said to my colleagues as well, we'd be very happy to discuss with others how we could support them in taking away learning from this project and doing some of this stuff themselves. There might not be a one-size-fits-all for this, and there might be some local variations that others are best able to tap into, for example. So I think that that's kind of my answer on the positive bit, and maybe I could leave it there for now. I would like to see that because we have had to, we have run out of money on this. So we were running 5 or 6 versions of this project across the south of England where we operate. those are no longer going to be available because of the situation, the finances, and we know that's where we are. If we can find a way of working with people to continue the service in different areas, then we'd be delighted to do that.
Thanks, Matthew. James, I'll come to you in a sec, but this is just resonates with the project we funded up in Scotland with Venture Trust, where very similar. They had a unique service that was, showed a fantastic return, but they couldn't get the funding initially. And we said, well, how are you now going to roll it out across the United Kingdom? And it comes down, I think, to a degree of ambition of perhaps sometimes even individual charities and boards to actually want to do something in this really, difficult environment at the moment. James, let me come to you because you haven't had a chance to speak yet, and I introduced you, of course, as a chair of the APPG. So, I mean, two questions really. Perhaps you could just explain how you see your role in supporting the armed forces community, and then perhaps more specifically, what do you think the APPG can do to support this idea of getting veterans advocacy services more widely available?
Well, good morning, Ray, and thank you for the invitation. Without writing checks that I can't cash, I'm probably well placed at the moment to understand that interface between the military world, veterans, and of course politics, because having left so recently in November 2019 after 26 years, having been a commanding officer before, I have a real feel for what goes through soldiers' minds. But of course, the issue for me is that when these guys leave the services, that umbrella does go. And I therefore commend the advocacy services and all those involved in that space in doing what they're doing, because it's about giving them not physical support, not money. It's about giving them sort of just advice and guidance and signposting, and that's really important for me. So to answer the question directly, I think that the role of the APPGs that I'm very privileged to chair, both veterans and also the Armed Forces Covenant, is to do two things really. Firstly, it's to represent people's interests and views in Westminster, to be a sponge for those people to contact me and say, look, this is what we're facing, what we're dealing with. And hence to lean on policy, lean on the MOD, because I'm clearly not part of the MOD, I'm not part of government. But the other thing, of course, is the fact that it's the voice of common sense. And we set up the Armed Forces Covenant APPG before Christmas, effectively to see the new Armed Forces Bill through and to support it. So I think the answer really, it comes down to fusion. It's about the ability to cohere all views, to cohere all inputs, to somehow represent those in Westminster, and then to hit the MOD with those outputs. There are 2.2 million veterans in the UK. The vast majority are fine. They're living happily, they're living successfully. But of course, it's that small proportion of those that need our help, and that's where I think we can all come in.
Thanks, James, and that's great, and we'll certainly, be contacting the APPGs to help you with that. I just wonder, Pam, if I come back to you, hopefully you can hear and speak. Okay, some of the comments in the chat, actually, again, they really resonate with me because it's about let's not go and fund yet another new service. This perhaps is about embedding advocacy within existing services. I wonder from your perspective, Pam, because you're not employed by an advocacy service. Is it possible to identify from your research, what is the USP about advocacy or an advocacy service?
Yeah, I mean, Matthew has mentioned some of the unique features of the service through what he's talked about, but also one thing that we mentioned in my presentation was that cultural sensitivity and how important that is, and that's really something that's inherent in the delivery of the Veterans Advocacy People service. So clients who avail of this service really will be engaging with people who have actually walked the same path, who can more readily relate to their perspective and their mindset. An advocate who's lived through that experience of military life, who can offer that peer delivered service as well, the empathy, the affinity of language, but also alongside that vast sectoral and system knowledge that's required to help people navigate the system as well. So the affinity and the empathy that they experience when they engage with them, but also the knowledge that they acquire. Those advocates really are best placed to walk alongside clients, help them navigate that complex veteran support system. And our research really did show how valued that is by clients as well. So it's a USP of the service, the way it's delivered, the way clients are engaged with, the support they receive. And it's definitely something that sets the service apart, that clients acknowledge as well through the research as being really important to them, and breaking down barriers really with the hardest to reach veterans as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, Pam. Listen, we're coming to the end of our webinar. I'm going to give Matthew the final say, but I'm going to kind of throw in a question to you there as well, Matthew, at the same time. A lot of the comments in chat, they're all around, the funding, the necessity of funding this at a difficult time. Before you conclude, let me ask you, if you were to take up Johnny Mercer's invitation there, and you were to be pleading in front of Rishi Sunak for money specifically for advocacy and for veterans advocacy, what are the arguments you would use?
Right. Okay. I will try and answer what I'd say there while also maybe sort of wrapping up. I think that's what you were suggesting there. Right?
Great.
So,
thanks. Yeah.
Okay. So let me do both those things then. First of all, can I just say thank you, Ray, to you and your colleagues at FiMT, first of all, for all the help on this, and to Pam and her colleagues at SERIO. This has been a really interesting ride to be on, and there's loads of value in here that people are talking about. And more generally, if I could just say thank you to all those advocates, service users, everyone really who's been involved in this in the delivery of this project with us over the last few years. I suppose thinking about this and also starting to move on to your question, I think that this SERIO study it gives us a huge kind of narrative to be able to use when we talk about this work, because it's all well and good for me. I'm the chief executive of an advocacy organisation, so shock. Matthew says advocacy is good, yeah. But what we have, I think, through some of the work that Pam and her colleagues have done, is, as I say, an independent narrative that helps us make the case for this much more powerfully. So what we have, and maybe this is to answer the question about what I'd say to the Chancellor or whatever, we can now identify that this is indeed a group of people who do seem to struggle at times with some of these specific issues, accommodation, finances, job recruitment, and I think the study makes it clear that advocacy interventions really can make a difference to that group. I think at that point, I also think that we should remember that advocacy is a particular kind of intervention. Advocacy is quite tough, and I pick on some of the words that Johnny used at the beginning, and that James was using when he talked as well, and reflecting on this community we're talking about. This is not about giving handouts. This is about a targeted investment in people who are living in a tough, complicated world, and like the rest of us, just occasionally need someone to use the phrase that I think Pam used earlier. Advocates talk about it a lot. So stand shoulder to shoulder, walk with them in their shoes. Yeah, there is something very modern about this kind of intervention to help fix things. It's not an old-fashioned handout. I think that there is a powerful modern narrative surrounding advocacy that we need to remember about the kind of work that it is. And what we've got, I would say, is evidence now that the well-being of these people shows significant improvement as a result of this kind of work. Consistently in the study we see talk about improved self-esteem, confidence, resilience. We see the annual financial gains that have been quantified in there, 4.5 million, I think the report talks about over every year. And the social return, to broaden it out beyond just the individual's sort of value, the social return investment, £4.74 Pam's figure for every £1 spent on delivering the service. This works. And if I'm talking to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, then showing that the financial investment work seems to me to be a nice little elevator pitch to be able to have in mind. So I suppose those are the sorts of things I talk about, Ray, if I were talking to the Chancellor. And maybe just to sort of conclude again, I mean, I do sit here, I'll be very honest to all of you, with something of a bittersweet taste in my mouth, and I think many people feel this. What we have here is a service that demonstrably works, but as we currently sit here, it ain't going to continue. And people will know to continue trying to find ways of doing that. And I know some others are looking at that in their own areas, and that's great. So maybe I could just end up repeating what I said in answer to one of the questions, really. If we can find some way of writing this into the statutory system, that would be superb. And that would be the way we could roll out this service more reliably to more of the people in this group, veterans who can benefit from it. Failing that, I do hope that we can find someone who is able to find a way of commissioning this service sustainably, and we'd be delighted to work with anybody who wants to talk to us about that. And finally, as I also said, even if it's not to do with the Advocacy People's version of this veterans service, if there are people out there who want to pick up some of this learning and run with it, then do get in touch with us. As Ray said, the full report is also available on our website, so you can look at that more generally there as well. Then do please get in touch with us, and let's talk about how we can really build something of value on this great work that we and many others have been able to do over the last few years. So I think that on that, it is now the time is up. Ray said I could close it, so I think I will do it at that. Once again, thanks to all of you who helped. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. And I hope you have a really good day. Thanks very much, everyone.